So my name is Richard Tripp, and I've written a book called Lessons Learned in Zuni, a Pueblo memoir. It's about the 3 years that I lived on the Zuni Pueblo Indian Reservation in New Mexico. And just to give a little bit of background to tell you how I got there from Lakeville, I was about to graduate from Bridgewater State College in 1967. And although I was a commuting student and had never lived on campus, I was getting a little bit nostalgic about having to leave Bridgewater. I hadn't been the happiest person there, but and I hadn't lived on campus, but somehow, you know, the change in routine makes you feel a little bit nostalgic sometimes. And one day, about a month before graduation, I thought, I would like to walk through Boyden Hall one last time. I think, as an English major, I think most of my English and history classes were held in Boyden Hall. So on my way to my car, I walked through Boyden Hall, and as I was walking down the hall, a young man stepped out of a reception room, and he said, I'm getting ready to show a film about Vista. He said, I'm looking for recruits. Would you be interested in seeing the film? And I said, Vista? I don't know what that is. And he said, it's Volunteers in Service to America. It's the Domestic Peace Corps. And I said, well, to be honest with you, I'm graduating in about a month. I'm not sure what my future is going to be. I said, I've had 2 job offers for teaching English, but when I graduate, I have to tell the draft board that I will no longer have a student deferment. I'm not sure what that's going to do about my future. And he said, well, let me tell you, if you apply to the Peace Corps or Vista, and if you're accepted, and if you do it, we give you a deferment. I went in to see the film. There was no question. So the first part of the film was a young man in the Atlanta area, and he was working in a ghetto area doing community service work. And I thought that was interesting, but it didn't really appeal to me. And then the second part of the film was this lovely girl with long blonde hair riding across the desert, on a horse, going from Navajo Hogan to Hogan, and she was signing up kids for kindergarten and preschool. And so that was an educational thing. She was an educational specialist. And when I saw that geography there, I thought, oh my God, I had never been outside of New England, except for once, to the New York World's Fair. Oh, I was a real traveler. And a very provincial person. So I thought it would be just wonderful to live there. And thinking about working on a reservation was really appealing to me, especially knowing that there might be jobs in education. So on the way out, he said, shall I give you an application? And I said, yes, but remember, I have to know within a month because other things could happen. So he said, because you're facing an uncertainty, he said, I will expedite this. So being as how he was working for the government, I didn't know what expedite meant because it could mean a year, But guess what? In 2 weeks, I had a letter of acceptance. And my letter said, we have reserved a plane flight for you, which would be my first. You're going to the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma, and you'll be part of the 6 weeks training program there. So that's where I went, with the idea still of the reservation in my mind. And I went through the training, but the disappointing thing was they said to me, unfortunately, there are no reservation jobs in this training group. You're going to be training for community service. So I thought, well, better community service in rural Oklahoma than carrying a gun in Vietnam. So I resigned myself to community service. But on the day when the director came and gave us our marching orders and told us where we'd be going for our projects, he said, you are the only person in this training group that will not be going to work in ghetto circumstances with the poor. We're sending you to a mental institution.
Oh.
Don't laugh, Neil. And I thought, oh, I wonder why that. And he said, you are the only person in the training group who has teaching credentials and a certificate for teaching. And he said, a school has been set up at Eastern State Hospital in rural Oklahoma. And it's primarily for kids who have to take a break out of their normal lives and they're at the hospital for therapy or for analysis or something, having difficulties in their lives. And instead of losing their credit from their home high school, if we have a person who's got credentials, then, it's not interrupting their life. So I went there as a VISTA volunteer. I never let go of the dream of the Indian Reservation, though. And when my 2 years were up in VISTA in Oklahoma at the hospital, I had the ring of keys. I had the key to the door, so it wasn't as if, I was behind bars or something. It was a very intense time, though. It was extremely difficult and tiring. And at the end of 2 years, I was really ready to leave. So, still thinking about the reservation. This is 1969 now. Remember, I didn't have a laptop. Nobody did. There was no such thing as a Google search engine. I didn't have a TV, a telephone. I was virtually isolated in this northern part of Oklahoma. I just opened an atlas and I chose 3 communities at random in the state of New Mexico that looked like they would be relatively close together, at least by Western standards. And I called the Department of Education in each city and I said, do you have an English high school teaching position for the fall? Each one said yes. So I booked a flight to Albuquerque. I went up to Santa Fe. I had my interview in Santa Fe on Monday. And while I was staying at the La Fonda Hotel, looking out over the plaza in the most beautiful city in this country, I think, I thought, I am destined to live here. This is going to be so wonderful and so tremendously exhilarating. I went to my interview on Monday morning. It was at a school. Unfortunately, it was not a high school, it was a middle school. That was a bit of a disappointment, but went to the interview. The principal and I had a wonderful conversation, and he said, you should call the superintendent this afternoon and find out the results of our interview. So when I called her, as soon afternoon as I dared, she said to me, thank you so much for coming. We don't think you're the right person for the job. And I said, would you mind telling me why? And she said, we don't think you can handle the discipline. And I said, have you read my resume? I've been working at a mental institution. I had a student who tried to strangle me because I accidentally won a chess game. I didn't realize I had his queen cornered, and I didn't know, but he knew, and he leapt across the chessboard and was trying to strangle me. I said, I really think that I could handle any kind of discipline that I will face. And she said, thank you again for coming. We don't think you're the person for the job. Okay, so much for destiny and Santa Fe. So, got on the bus and went to Albuquerque. The next day I went to this big, dusty, old brick school. It was a hot July day. I don't know why the guy who interviewed me had on a suit and a tie, but we were just both sweating buckets. And Albuquerque was so much bigger than I had anticipated, and it was like a real city. And the guy didn't seem very interested in finding out what I had been doing for 2 years, my educational background or my teaching experience. And he asked me really boring, standard questions, and I gave him really boring standard answers. And I thought, cross this one off. You know, I'm not interested in the city. I don't like the feeling of the school, the person who's interviewing me. You're going to think I'm a really picky person, I know. I am probably, but so it was all down to Gallup. I got on the train, I went to Gallup. When I got there, night was falling, and I got out of the train station, and there were 3 Navajos lying on the sidewalk with their bottles of wine very badly disguised in paper bags. They were lying comatose on the sidewalk. I had to step over them to get out of the building. I was the only person who got off the train there. And I looked at the town and I thought, oh, I don't know about this. It was very honky-tonk, you know, lots of neon lights. There was no I-90 something that went around the town. It was Route 66 that went right through the center of the town. It was really noisy and busy, and I thought, well, I guess what I'll do tomorrow morning is I won't even go to the interview. I'll just get back on the plane, go to Oklahoma for another year, and I'll just research it earlier so that I'm able to find something. So the next morning, though, I woke up, there was nobody lying on the sidewalk. It was a crisp, bright morning. The sky was really clear. The sky is really big out there. And I thought, well, it would be rude not to go to the interview, so I went. And immediately, this guy named Barney Elder was the man who was going to tell me I had a future or didn't in New Mexico. And I thought, I think he really likes me. And then I started thinking, what if he offers me a job? I really don't think I want to live in Gallup. It doesn't seem like a friendly place. And so the interview went on, and then he said, Richard, I'd like to offer you a job. And I thought, oh no, what am I going to say? And then he looked at me, and his face was like stricken with apology. And he said, but the job isn't here in Gallup. And of course I'm thinking, oh no, not here in Gallup, that's too bad. But I try not to be sarcastic if I don't know people, because it can backfire. And not everybody has a sense of humor, I find, in life. So he said, no, it's on an Indian reservation about 40 miles south of here. It's Zuni Pueblo. And inside, I could feel this rush of adrenaline, and I was so excited. But of course, being the New Englander that I am, I didn't want to look, you know, like I was too excited. So I said, well, that could be interesting to me, but I don't know that I can sign a contract for a job when I've never seen the school that I'd be teaching in or see the community that I'd be working in. And he picked up the phone and he found somebody and he said, I have some papers that I need to send down to the Zuni principal's office, and a young man who'd like to go down for about an hour and see the school. Can you take him? So that was it. My dream had come true. I was going to be working on a reservation. I went back on the plane with a contract in my pocket, my very first contract. I was almost 26 years old, and I think up to that point I had been more or less a professional volunteer all my life. And I had a contract that was signed. I was going to be earning $4,300 a year. I couldn't believe it. I think as a Vista volunteer, I either got $50 a week or $50 every 2 weeks. I can't remember, but it was very low. So I went back to Oklahoma, and I trained my successor, and I rented a U-Haul truck. Oh, I bought a car because I had to borrow money. I had to borrow $400 to buy a Volkswagen Beetle, which, you know, I trusted the woman who sold it to me. She was a nurse at the hospital where I worked. She didn't tell me that the car drank oil the same way that we drink water to hydrate and stay alive. the car didn't go for more than about 100 miles before you had to stop and pour, a quart of oil in. So in August of 1969, I had my dog in the front in the U-Haul with me. I had my 2 cats trailing behind in the Volkswagen that I was dragging. And I'm going to be reading you a few excerpts from the book. This is page 1, arriving in New Mexico, August 1969. Desert darkness descended somewhere between Albuquerque and Gallup. My 2-day drive from Oklahoma, alone except for the company of my dog Molly, in a U-Haul pulling an old Volkswagen, would soon end. I was exhausted, my eyes bleary, my brain tired of solitary, voiceless thought. I nervously watched the signs that told me the distance to Gallup, calculating gas and mileage, because I was down to my last $5 bill neighbors had tucked into a Farewell food basket for me. I did not own a credit card, and thanks to a ruined tire on the Volkswagen en route, no money. I felt the tension of being poor. The winking lights of Gallup seemed friendly as Route 66 wound up to town. It was well after 9 p.m., and I felt too incoherent to drive the last 40 miles to Zuni. So where to spend the night on $5 would be my last worry this August evening. Gallup blazed with gaudy lights. Fast food establishments, restaurants, gas stations, and motels lured the tourist traffic. To my right, in a long stretch of darkness, lay the familiar train tracks and station I'd arrived at 2 months earlier for my interview. With little warning, the city limits came to an abrupt end. Arizona seemed to be the next stop. An all-night cafe and truck stop appeared to my left. With only $5, the choice was easy. I would have a hot meal in a cafe, sleep with my dog on the seat of the U-Haul, then drive to Zuni in the morning. Inside, the cafe pulsed with country western ballads. I sat in a booth where I could see everything. Through the swinging door came a middle-aged Navajo woman, her coal black hair tied with a scarf in a knot on the back of her head. She had on a bright velveteen blouse and a colorful pleated cotton skirt, quite a contrast to the younger Indian girls clad in jeans. The stunning contrast of her clothing with the stainless steel and vinyl of her surroundings became my first hint of the culture shock awaiting me in Zuni. Anxiety and tension from travel and anticipation of getting to the reservation the next day didn't keep me from sleeping, although I awakened once or twice as large rigs with air brakes pulled in or out. Sleep descended quickly that night. I was really anxious to get to Zuni, to unload my things, and to return my truck to Gallup, because there was a $100 deposit that I had to put on the truck that I was going to be getting back. And that was going to be my food money until my first check came. And in Zuni, we were paid once a month. Week number 4 was always a really hard week in Zuni. So I got there the next day, and I was taken to the teacherage, which is a motel-like structure on the grounds of the school. On the reservation, Anglo people can't own property or houses. And so the teachers have to live in these motel-like structures. I think it's to keep them all together so they won't disperse and, go places where they shouldn't go. And I could tell almost immediately within the first couple of weeks that I wasn't going to be happy living in the teacherage. Being a kind of watcher of people, I determined very quickly that there weren't a lot of people in the teacherage that I was going to make close friends with. And they came in certain categories. I'll tell you what a few of those categories were. I was in the safest category. I was a young, relatively new teacher. The other new teachers were mostly from Texas. Mostly they were first-year teachers. they were kind of, well, I was only almost 26. They were all kind of young and frivolous. I knew by looking at them they weren't going to be there for very long. Some of them weren't even going to be there for a year, I knew. Some of them hadn't asked to see, where will I be teaching? Take me down there and show me. Some of them had been, over the phone, given a job. Some of them didn't even know it was an Indian reservation they were going to. So you can imagine how difficult it was for them to be there. The other group in the benign category were the really old people. Now, I'm 81, so don't think I'm an ageist or anything. Don't think I'm picking on old people, because I'm one myself. But I guess in Texas, there is a retirement mandatory age. And these old people from Texas, mostly women, who didn't belong on a reservation, were there. And they were kind of silly, you know. One woman had a big, huge, long car, a Chrysler, I think it was, and she wore opera-length glasses, opera-length gloves that came up to her elbows. And because she was bored in Zuni, she drove the 80-mile round trip to Gallup every other day to get a hamburger at McDonald's. And when one of her, she was a home ec teacher, and when one of her students said, "I'd like to invite you to come to our house for Shalako," which is the most critical, important religious ceremony of the Zuni year, she said to the girl, "Oh, my dear, I couldn't possibly do that. That's just a bunch of silly superstition."
Oh my goodness.
So I knew that I wasn't going to get along with people like that. And then it went all the way up to, well, there were, since I don't know a lot of you, I'm going to be really careful about what I say about these people, because you never know. I know that you won't come in this category, though. The worst offenders there were the people who dealt in Zuni jewelry. Teaching was simply their access to the people who made jewelry. They weren't there to seriously teach. Most of them sat with their feet on the desk reading the sports pages and gave busy work and left their classes during class to buy jewelry from parents who would stop by the school and come to the lobby and say, "I'd like to see Mr. So-and-so, I've got a package here for him." And they would freely say to anybody who would listen, "I make 10 times more selling jewelry than I do teaching school here," which I didn't think was a very good thing to be honest about, but I guess I'm glad I knew it. I thought, I'm here to get to know the kids and their families, and to know something about their language and their culture and their backgrounds and their history. I don't want to be in this little enclave of white people, like a little white teacher reservation within a bigger Indian reservation way out in the middle of a great big huge open expanse of thousands of acres. And if the people in the village see me as one of the teachers, I'm not going to get very far. You know, I'm not going to make friends with them. So I started looking immediately for an alternative place to live. And the little Volkswagen with a couple of cans of oil in the back took me lots of different places. One day, a new friend of mine, I did make a few friends there, by the way. A friend Robert was a first-year teacher. He taught math in the school. And we were just riding off down little roads behind in the countryside. There was only one paved road that went through the reservation. That was Highway 53. It was just a 2-lane road. And we went, this is the mesa, the sacred mesa, which has a big historical importance there. It's where the Zunis fled to in the 1580 era, when the Spaniards came through and started killing them looking for the land of gold, looking for the land of Cibola and gold. So we were driving down behind that mesa. The road around Doyalney wound on, and the mountain stretched farther to the south than could be seen from the road. The car seemed to drive itself, kept in place by the deeply rutted tire tracks. After my initial reverence in the presence of the mesa, I became intoxicated by the freedom of the place and the feeling of being really remote. The mesa was directly to our left, and others appeared to the south, yet our perimeters seemed unbounded. The openness, the quiet beauty of a waning afternoon on a Southwest reservation made me giddy. Shockingly blue pinon jays darted out of the junipers. In my joy and excitement, I accelerated the little car and we went sliding through ridges of sand that recent rains had swirled into the lane. Bumped through a couple of shallow washes and passed through a gold and gray-green rabbit brush that stood nearly as tall as the car. Robert and I laughed as the little car bounced. I swerved around between some big grassy tussocks. Then we saw it. A low house of neatly quarried stone with little square windows catching the diminishing light. I stopped the car, wondering if we were imposing on someone's privacy, although the place suggested inactivity and abandonment. Something about this little place on a rise right next to the towering edge of the mesa struck me instantly, and I knew I wanted to live here. Luckily, across an arroyo not too far away, we saw a man putting some sheep into a corral. So I went over and talked with him, and I said, "Do you know who lives in that house?" And he said, "Nobody lives there, but it belongs to my mother-in-law." So he told me who she was, where I could find her in the village, and I went to talk to her. And of course she thought, what does this young teacher from Massachusetts want living in my sheep camp? She said, "You know, it's a mile and a half off the paved road. When it rains or snows, it's going to be really muddy." And I said, "That's okay." She said, "It has a dirt floor, and I can only rent you the one big room. There's no bathroom, there's an outhouse, there's no running water, there's no electricity." I said, "It sounds great." So she said, "Well, maybe I'll go out there Thursday with my grandsons and we'll see if the roof still leaks." And the minute she said that, I thought, oh, she's going to rent it to me. You know, they're going to fix it up. So when I went out there Thursday after school, she was washing the adobe walls inside and making fry bread on the stove, on the wood stove. And the grandson was up on the roof, which oddly enough, the roof was being held down by these old radiators that they had gotten at some kind of a, I don't know, store in Gallup where old radiators are sold, I guess. Renovator Supply or something, I don't know. And I went up and I helped him daub tar on the holes. We did a pretty good job, except when it rained, which wasn't very often. There's only about 8 inches of rainfall a year in Zuni. My bed was in the exact spot where no water came through, so all I had to do was sit on my bed when it rained, and I was all set. I went to the edge of the mesa every morning and every afternoon to get 2 pails of water. The spring came out of the sandstone layers of rock and into the buckets. I had to get up high enough so that I was above where the mustangs came every afternoon. Wild mustangs and sheep came to get water every afternoon there. One thing that's kind of embarrassing to tell is I loved the outhouse. It didn't have a door on it, which was okay because my nearest neighbor was 2 or 3 miles away. And you couldn't see anything, you know, from where I was. You couldn't see any life at all, except wildlife. And some nights you could be in the outhouse and you could see a plane going overhead. And the plane was so high up, you couldn't hear it. But I calculated that it must be going between Los Angeles and Chicago based on its trajectory. And I thought, I'll bet there are some very sophisticated people up in that plane with attaché cases, with contracts and important things. They're having cocktails. This is when you could, have things on planes, I guess. Having cocktails and eating something. They have no idea what's happening down here. They have no idea that anyone lives like this anymore. And I am so lucky to be where I am and not where they are. That might be kind of weird, but I think I've always felt that way. It was wonderful to live at the sheep camp. Instantly, everybody in the village knew who I was. Kids came and said, "Oh, we happened to be going by. We wondered, would you like us to chop some wood for you?" And at that moment in time, this was the beginning of October of 1969, I had no idea how cold it was going to get in the winter. 55 below zero. Zuni is 6,800 feet in altitude. We are right almost near the crest of the, the Continental Divide. In other words, top of the Rockies. It was so cold there that when I walked to school, sometimes my vehicle wouldn't work. When I walked to school, Molly, by the way, had a puppy, so while we were there. So I would carry the puppy in my arms because I had to walk to school. And when I got to school, the puppy and I were frozen together because the condensation from my breath iced up my beard and the top of her fur, so that when we got there, it was very difficult and painful. I didn't give up the little apartment at the teacherage. It was a smart thing to do because I thought, what if I can't make it through the winter? What if Mrs. Cucci comes and tells me I need the place for lambing in the spring? You're going to have to move out. So I thought I'd better keep it. And it was a good thing to do because I could leave school at noon, go to the teacherage and have my lunch there, let Molly out, and then, And I have to say, here I am bragging about getting my water out of the side of the mesa and sitting in an outhouse with no door on it and having a mud floor. I did cheat. I had a hot shower at the teacherage every day. But anyway, it was my link with people in the village. Although I had moved far out and was living more like a Zuni than Zunis even lived anymore, it was a good way for me to make connections with the people in the village. I had a lot of visitors while I was there. Not all of them welcome visitors, but one night I was sitting on my bed, cross-legged. I had a little box stove next to me for heat. I was doing grades. I was filling out report cards, and all of a sudden there was a pounding on the door. And I went to the door, and there were these three big, brawny men there. And one of them had a rifle over his shoulder. And I thought, oh no, they've come to kill me. When you're an outsider, you don't know. There are always people who resent outsiders. And so I opened the door. There was nothing else I could do. The only lock I had on my door was a padlock on the outside. So you could lock the house when you went away, but when you were in the house, you couldn't. I suppose I could have bought another padlock and put it on the inside, but anyway, I opened the door and one of the guys said, "Our friend has had a fall. We think his back is broken. Could you give us a ride to the hospital?" So I said, oh, I was so relieved. Oh, it's only a broken back. I'll live after all. Very selfishly, I was thinking. So as I was getting my boots on and my jacket, they said, well, we don't think his back is broken. He fell, but we think he's just hurt himself. They had gotten stuck in the mud. And when we all got in the cab of the truck, it was I had a truck by this time. Somebody plowed into the Volkswagen, and it was a wreck. And I upgraded to an $800 old Ford truck, which was good for getting wood. When we got into the cab of the truck, I could tell by the smell of alcohol on their breaths that it wasn't really a broken back. It was just, they were down in the Box Canyon in another sheep camp. They had come because the coyotes were coming in from the woods and from the mesa tops and wherever and killing the sheep. And they were there to kill the coyotes and to dispatch the sheep that had been injured. So they invited me in for a cup of coffee, which I don't drink, but I thought it would be a friendly thing to go in and have a cup of coffee with them. And it was like stepping into a meat locker. All of these halves of sheep were hanging from the rafters. And they took one down and cut a big slab of meat off and gave it to me, and thanks for the ride. And I took it back to my cabin, and I hung it on a hook in my kitchen. And I thought, maybe this week I'll make mutton stew. That's what a lot of Zunis like to eat, is mutton stew. But I didn't think about it for a couple of weeks, and when I took it down, it had this very soft, lovely green film all over it. And I thought, oh, it didn't occur to me. Well, of course, I knew I was living without a refrigerator. That was the year I became a vegetarian, so it was very handy. I just took the piece of meat and I flung it into the desert in the night air. And a couple of days later, Molly found it, and I found her chewing on it, gnawing on it, and I tried to take it away from her, but of course she wouldn't let me have it. And Molly did not die. Molly couldn't be killed. She had many adventures in her 15 or so years, and one of them was eating nasty green covered mutton. I knew that I wouldn't live there for more than the year that I did, because I couldn't have a stereo. I didn't have a TV. I didn't want a TV. But without lights, if you're an English teacher and you're reading journals and you're reading essays and you're reading papers, and by the way, I was teaching 6 classes a day and I had 140 students that I saw every day. I had a lot of grading to do. And even with 2 oil lamps on the table right in front of me, after about an hour and a half, I would have this horrible headache. So the second year I went back, I put the word out that I wanted to find a house in the village. And somebody found me one, a little 2-room apartment in the stacked Pueblo. And it was wonderful. I was the only white person who lived in the village. So if people didn't know me then, they were certainly going to know me. So I want to tell you about something that happened in the village house. It's called Getting Acclimated. 2 events occurred the first weekend at the new house that seemed to foreshadow many experiences that were to happen in my 2 years in the center of the village. Fall's early darkness settled in, and the simultaneous busy activity that always accompanies such an evening began. Carol, a new friend and teacher at Doyalany Elementary School, and I sat listening to the chatter of people passing the house. Now and then an axe sounded as someone chopped wood near a pile of scraps burning for light. I jumped up to respond to a sudden knock on the door. 4 or 5 Zuni teenagers tumbled through the doorway. One student said she and her friends wanted to get warm for a minute while waiting for another friend to return from Gallup. They rubbed the coolness of the evening from their hands. They seemed more animated and vigorous than I had ever seen them in school. Caught off guard, I said, yes, they could get warm a while. I was unsure of my role in the village yet. They wouldn't take a seat, but seemed to want to watch out the window for their friend's return, turning their backs to us. Although not yet acclimated to my new home, yet it was my home and I suddenly felt a stranger there. Carol and I retreated to the back room where we set about organizing boxes of clutter from the apartment. Not much time had gone by when I heard a muffled but distinctive pop-top on a can. It wasn't soda, I knew, for everyone at school talked about the problem of alcohol abuse. I really didn't like the awkwardness of the situation. The teens were now standing or sitting on a trunk in the corner of a dimly lit room. They seemed oblivious to me as I approached, but when I told them I wanted one of them to leave, one of the group, whom I recognized as the Pueblo governor's son, stepped challengingly close to me. "Why do you live here?" he wanted to know. "What gives you the right to intrude in our village?" I was taken aback, unable to respond with the obvious question of my own, asking him to explain what gave him the right to challenge me after I'd offered them the hospitality of my home. Beer courage made this teenager a kind of student I had not yet encountered, bold, belligerent, and loud. As we stood face to face, all kinds of thoughts of insecurity raced through my mind. Moving to the village had been a mistake. I wasn't welcome. Surely this boy voiced what others also felt but were too polite to say. I would be in trouble in school or with the villagers. It would appear that I had invited the students in and sanctioned their drinking. Before any decision requiring action could take place, several of his friends grabbed the boy's sleeve and left as quickly as they had tumbled in. The students left, Carol left, and once the house became quiet, I tried to get the feeling of being settled in. Exhaustion got the better of me, and I made my escape from the problem of the moment by falling into a deep sleep. If you sleep well and easily, I recommend it highly. Some people take pills. When I'm worried or distressed or anxious, I just close my eyes and go to sleep. It's wonderful. I've always been able to do it. The next morning I woke up and I looked out the window, and there were 12 women walking by, all in traditional garb. They had olias on their head with steam coming out of the top, and I think they were headed towards the kiva where their husbands or their brothers or their fathers or whoever were having a meeting, probably had been practicing for rituals or something, and the ladies were taking them breakfast. And I thought, I don't care what people think. I don't care if there are people who don't want me living here. A Zuni lady has rented me the house. By the way, Zuni is a matriarchy where the women own the homes. And a man, when he marries, goes to his wife's home. And I'm not sure if it still works this way, but it used to be that his paycheck didn't go to his wife. It went to the oldest living matriarch in the household. So it might be his wife's grandmother. It might be his wife's great-grandmother. Men, certain roles were for men and certain roles were for women. And it made things kind of equal and kind of interesting. I did have also another exciting event that happened at the house. I made this pottery here, which is called a Gyauya Walikia. It's a cornmeal carrying bowl. And the rain priest, when he comes into the plaza leading the dancers in, has this Gyauya Walikia in his hand, and he's spreading sacred cornmeal with bits of turquoise in it to bless the ground and to help the dancers do their best ceremony. And I had been in a student's home visiting with parents and having a meal when two of the mudheads came. Those are men that work for the good of the disadvantaged in Zuni, and they do some kinds of ceremonies. They come around and they collect food for people who are in need. And if you don't give them food, fire visits you. Now, when I asked my student, what do you mean? He said, well, your kerosene might explode, or your wood stove might send out some sparks and ignite the kindling, or, you know, you might, I don't know, they mentioned several different things, and I thought, do you mean they're arsonists? He said, no, fire just visits you. You have to give the mudheads a contribution. Well, one day, the mudheads came to my house, and I had made the Gawi Walikia in pottery, an evening pottery class, and so I knew exactly what to do. I invited the mudheads in. I sat 2 chairs facing east, I think is that way, facing east. I said, Achimu, the 2 of you sit down. They sat down. I went to my shelf to get food. It must have been week number 4 because I didn't have much in the house. And I had to give them something that was in a can. You know, I couldn't give them loose food. So I picked up a can of minced clams. Being a New Englander, I like to make clam chowder every once in a while. There's no such thing as getting fresh clams from the ocean out there, so it was minced clams. And I had a can of ocean spray cranberry sauce. And I think when they got back to the Kiva, they're probably saying, what the hell is this? Minced clams and cranberry sauce? Where's this guy from? No wonder he's skinny. Look what he's eating. But that's what I had. So all they're wearing is they're barefooted. Their bodies are covered with adobe sort of mud. They have on a black woolen kilt, this little bag that they're wearing on their back that they accept the food in, and then these grotesque canvas masks with like little donuts and things all over them. They're very scary looking. So then I went to my cupboard, which they were facing. I got down my Gawi Awalikia. I thought, oh, I hope they can see this through those masks, through the little holes for their eyes. I hope they can see that I'm doing all the right things, because I don't want fire to visit me. And I went behind them and I sprinkled the cornmeal. My pottery teacher had given me some sacred cornmeal. I sprinkled that on them. And then you're supposed to say a prayer. And that's the part I didn't know. And I thought, oh no, what do I do? Maybe they're not bilingual. Maybe I could just say the Lord's Prayer and they wouldn't know the difference. But no, I don't think that's true. I'm not multilingual, but they probably are, so I won't do that. I could just mutter something. Maybe the canvas will distort what I'm saying, and if I just mutter it, they'll think I've said the right thing. Or maybe I could just be honest. How about that? That's, I suppose that's a novelty. I could say, I know I'm supposed to say a prayer, but I'm really sorry, I haven't learned what it is yet. I hope that's okay. But before I could say anything or do anything, they started making their funny noises that they make in communicating with each other. The mudheads do this, not Zunis in general. They stood up and they left. And I thought, wow, I wonder if that went well or not. I wasn't really sure. And that night I was sponsoring a dance in the high school cafeteria. And my next door neighbor, who lived right next door to me, was janitor at the school, and he came over and he stood by me and he said, I heard you had some visitors this afternoon. And my heart stopped and I said, yeah, I did. And he said, they said you knew just what to do. Oh. I thought, whew, fire's not going to visit. It didn't. I was okay. So things like that happened all the time. It was really quite exciting. There were lots of advantages to living in the village. In the night I would wake up and hear the footsteps of people who were going to be doing rituals going through the alleyway between my house and the next house. I would hear the bells on their ankles and their knees. The turtle shell rattles. They'd be saying something in Zuni, and I'd oftentimes get up and follow them at a respectful distance, and if there were a lot of people in the house where they went in to perform, I would go in as well. I never asked questions. I never tried to pry into things that weren't my business. I felt that I'd be better accepted if I didn't ask a lot of questions. One of the other things that I did was I helped this lady to get a job. She was cooking beans in the cafeteria. Her name is Daisy Hui, and her grandmother was the famous Nampeo of Hopi, a well-known and highly respected Hopi woman who renewed the interest in Indian pottery in the Southwest, and who began making it when many people had let the skill die. And her granddaughter Daisy was my teacher. My principal came and said to me, all the teachers in this school have to coach. And I thought, oh boy, that's going to be a hard one. I'm not built for coaching, really. I'm not good at sports. I have no interest in sports. Sorry to say that. What will I coach? And he said, well, we have an Indian dance group here. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. But I know nothing about the songs, the dances, the costumes. He said, don't worry, you will be the official faculty sponsor, but I will get this lady, Daisy, who's cooking beans in the cafeteria. She'll be your assistant. Of course, she was the one who really taught them everything, and she taught me too. And when I heard her story, I couldn't believe it sounded like a lie. It sounded like a fabrication. I knew it couldn't be, and it wasn't. But she said, when I was little, I had a virus that did something to her eyes. And she said, I was taken to California by a wealthy woman in Santa Barbara. She got me operations. I could see again. She paid for my education through college. She said, she sent me to the Sorbonne in Paris. And I thought, what? I had a chauffeur-driven car wherever I wanted to go. And I thought, no way. This is an old lady in a pinafore dress, you know, pinafore apron and a house dress. And she said, and I studied sculpture with Auguste Rodin. And I thought, this is absolutely crazy. Several years ago, I Googled it. She did do those things. So I went right to the principal and I said, why is this woman cooking beans and fry bread in the cafeteria? She should be the art teacher in the art room. And he said to me what all administrators say to anybody. Does she have paper credentials? I said, no, of course not. But she has empathy, and she's bilingual, and she understands the art of, you know, her people. She should be the teacher. And he said, well, you know, without a degree and without paper credentials, I can't do that. But she could be an aide there. So she was. And I convinced her to give evening classes. And it was amazing. I'm just going to read you one more excerpt, and then maybe you'd like to ask me some questions. Let's see. Right here somewhere. Sunnis think that the clay that they use is the skin of Mother Earth, and it's very sacred to them. And they treat their clay, the site where they dig it, and how they transport it, and how they use it, and work with it. They treat the clay with great reverence. And it was a real education for me working with Daisy. One paragraph that will tell you a whole lot about Zuni personality. Well, she was Hopi, but she was married to a Zuni. I admired Daisy's ability to treat lightly what some would take too seriously. Some weeks into our pottery course, when we were working on second and third pieces, Daisy sanded on a large jar, the squat-shouldered kind associated with the Hopi. Its very shape and size seemed to defy natural laws with its almost saucer-like shape and thin walls that curved, then covered most of the opening on the top. Daisy had worked on this for weeks, just in shaping and sanding. One evening, the public health service doctor and husband of one of the teachers came to watch the end of the class and accidentally crushed the jar, which was hidden beneath a newspaper on the table. A very embarrassed silence came over the room. The young doctor apologized profusely, but Daisy's laughter eased the tension. She explained that she had made many such jars and would in all probability make many more, so there was no need to be worried about the one that broke. This easiness to Daisy's personality, so typical of the Pueblo people, made working with her enjoyable. She helped when a pot went out of control. She took her work seriously, yet not too seriously. She gave us a feeling for the spirit behind what we created as we struggled to construct the vision each of us had of Pueblo pots and what they represented. Just two more very short things, and then this is at the end. I cannot imagine a time when I will not get to Zuni for a week here or there. My time in Zuni was the most important and concentrated special time of my life. I learned so much about teaching, being a friend, embracing adventure, expressing my artistic interests, feeling the spirit of place. I met my lifelong friend and wife in Zuni, and we started our family there. Mostly, I learned about myself, my strengths and deficiencies, which I continue to work on. Zuni touched me in so many ways, and I am grateful for its influence in my life. I remember my days in Zuni as if they were yesterday, and not decades in the past. And then finally, being in Zuni was a kind of birth experience for me, allowing me to be more than I had previously been, helping me to be more receptive to whatever surrounded me, more determined to understand and embrace. Never will I forget the laughter, jokes, friendliness, and talents of the many people who made me feel close to a certain spot on the map and keep alive a special place in my heart. So, it was very difficult for me to compress 3 years of experiences into 234 pages. It's even more difficult to put it into 45 minutes. So you might have some questions for me. I don't know. Yes?
Can you explain those beautiful artifacts on the table
Okay.
in front of us?
Anything in particular, or? Okay, I won't do all of them, but, okay. One of my first weeks there, I had a student who told me that his mother made pottery. Her name is Josephine Nahohai. And I said, oh, would she make me a pot? And he said, oh, yeah, come by the house and talk to her. So I did. And she said, I can make you an olia. It will cost $50. And $50 was a lot of money for me at the time. $4,300 was what I got for the year. And so on the appointed day when she had taken the pots out of the kiln, she invited me by, and the pot has been broken since then. I only dare to bring things that are broken because the things that are not broken are so valuable now that I don't want to take a chance. So it had this burn mark on it. So she said, well, that's like a second, so I'll only charge you $25. Is that okay? And I thought, oh, I want a perfect one. You know, I mean, I didn't say that. So I said, sure, of course, that's fine. I was happy it was only 25, but I was unhappy that it had a burn mark on it. So a couple of years later, when I was visiting for the summer in Zuni, my teacher friend Daisy was firing some pots in a sheet manure oven outside. And she said to the ladies that were helping her, put several of them next to the edge so that they'll get burned marks on them. And I said, why would you want burn marks on them, Daisy? And she said, oh. She said, well, at that time, she said, the pots are $500 each. But she said, when they come from the galleries in Los Angeles, she said they will pay me thousands of dollars for ones that have been, that are original, not something that's been put in the kiln at the art, in the art room at the high school, something that's been done in an original outdoor sheet manure kiln. That will be evidence of it. She said it will be worth many times more. And I thought, oh. I had a deaf cat when I was in Zuni, and it used to crawl in here and sleep. And it was on a low shelf on a table, and one day somebody came in my house and slammed the door. And the cat, although it couldn't hear anything, felt the jarring motion of the door slamming and struggled to get out of the pot, which fell and broke. And all I had at the time was Elmer's glue. So I just glued the pieces together. And so the pot that I paid $25 for, that today might be worth $3,000 or $4,000, is broken. But that's okay. I have unbroken ones at home. So, this is a wedding jug. A friend of mine made this. The symbolism is one vessel with two spouts, suggesting the husband and wife coming together in a marriage. And the husband pours for the wife, and the wife pours for the husband. And so that's, the lady who did this was Acoma by birth, but she was married to a Zuni man. This very large weaving on the bottom here is Navajo. It's probably maybe 120 or 30 years old. And I got it from a lady in Plymouth whose uncle from England had come to live in the Four Corners region for quite a while, like around the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he took this back to England with him. And when he died, my friend in Plymouth who inherited it said she wanted me to come and tell her about it. And I researched it and told her as much as I could about where it was from and how it was made and everything. And then I said, if you ever want to sell it, you know. So she said, well, I would like to sell it, probably. So I made an offer, and she accepted it. And she said to me, I was in a gallery recently, and there was a painting in there that I really liked, and she said, the amount that you offered me is the exact amount of the painting that I saw. And I would rather have the painting than the weaving. And of course, I would rather have the weaving. So this is Navajo, and this is called a yay rug. These are representatives of the gods. And the rug would have been woven on a loom this way. And so you can see that every time you go across with a row of colors, there might be 20 or 30 different changes that you have to make. Very, very complicated. I'm not sure why the Navajos have this facility, but they have an amazing sense of mathematics. My wife went once to a little festival that was being held out in the middle of nowhere, and there was going to be a horse race. And there was a lady there taking money from people, bets on horses, and she knew what, and I don't even know how to say this, she knew what the odds were, and she knew if you were giving $50 for so-and-so on such and such a horse that had this much chance of winning, she remembered who gave her what amount of money and what money she had to give them back according to what place the horse came in. I don't know how anybody does that. I couldn't even do that with a calculator. But she could. And Navajos are extremely, you probably know about the Navajos that they have the most complicated language almost, I think, in the world. And that in World War II, the highest of secret information was passed with the language of the Navajos that the Japanese were never able to decipher. The Zuni language is almost as complicated. It's unrelated to the Navajo language, but it's very complicated as well. I do some weavings. This is one of mine. This is a pottery design, but I've woven it onto this. And this is, my wife and I raise border Leicester sheep. And this is wool from our sheep, as is this one right here. This wool has been hand spun. My wife spun this wool, and then I wove with it. That's also an Anasazi design. If you've ever been to Mesa Verde or heard about it in southern Colorado, the cliff dwellings, those were the ancestors to the Zuni people. And because it's so dry out there, any piece of pottery or piece of weaving or piece of artwork, it doesn't get destroyed as things would here with all the rain that we have and the moisture. And then this is kind of a common Zuni motif. It's on that pot that I showed you that Josephine made. It's a deer with heart line indicating the breath of life and the ability to live. The thing that's kind of neat about Zunis when they go hunting, for example, is they always have little bits of, in a pouch on their pocket or their belt, they have little bits of sacred cornmeal. And sometimes they have little stone fetishes that they've carved. When they kill the deer, they say a prayer to it, and they say, "I'm sorry I've taken your life," I'm paraphrasing. But it's to keep our lives going that we ask you to sacrifice yours, and they say a prayer to the deer. They put the fetish with them, and they sprinkle the sacred cornmeal on them. A great reverence for everything that's alive. In fact, in one of the ceremonies that they have, there's a dance that goes on for 3 hours. It's usually a 15-year-old boy. He's called the Shulawitsi, the fire god, and he dances that entire time without stopping. I'm not sure how anybody can do it. I think that's why he's 15.
Yeah.
Kids are just too stupid. I don't really mean that, but you know what I mean. They're athletic. Somebody was his coach. I don't know. It wasn't me. But, and all the time he's dancing for those 3 hours, there's another group of people, and I think it's the Mudheads, the Koyemshi. They are singing a chant that says the name of every single natural thing that can be found on the reservation. The minerals, the water, the soil, the bugs, the birds, the animals, the plants, everything. And it's their great, that they're asking for, they're giving their gods a thank you for the year past and the gifts that they've been given. And they're praying for a good year to come. So there's just a whole lot of reverence for natural things. This weaving right here, this black one, is called a manta. And it's kind of it's sort of like a dress. It's worn over, it's a woman's dress. And it's worn over a cotton dress. And it's wool. It's nice and warm. And it's used in ceremonies. This is from Hopi, from Arizona. This is a wedding sash. If you have ever seen Hopi girls with kind of big, funny things on the side of their heads, like, I don't know, they almost look like seashells or something, but it's the way their hair is done. And it indicates that they're women looking for husbands, unmarried girls. And one day when I was living in the village, a man came through and he was selling his baskets. He was from Santo Domingo Pueblo. There are 19 pueblos, by the way. 18 of them are in New Mexico, and then the one, Hopi, is in Arizona. But the Santo Domingo man came by and he was selling these woven baskets that are made of willows. And I wished that I could have bought them all, but of course I couldn't. I could only buy the one. It was $17. Of course, by today's standards, that would be nothing. Probably in a gift shop, this would be, I don't know how much. We haven't been to New Mexico since 2019, but we're going in mid-May, and I'm anxious to see what people are still doing there, what people are making and selling and celebrating. Other questions?
When do your sheep go out into the pastures? I love to see them when I go by.
My sheep,
Mm.
they're out there every day. They're not always out in front, but
Every day.
yeah.
And they're shorn when?
Hmm?
When do you have them sheared? When do you shear them?
They're being shorn next week. We have sheep on the vineyard too, out on Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, okay.
And they've already been sheared. We shear them in February.
Oh,
And we used to shear in January because the way our schedule was, we had our lambs in January. And little lambs like to sleep on their mothers. And of course, we're raising sheep that are especially chosen for their wonderful fleeces for spinning and weaving. And all it takes is a couple of twin lambs sleeping on their mother's back for 2 months to ruin the wool entirely. And sheep don't seem to, well, it never gets 55 below zero weather here either. So, and they all go under the barn at night, so it's kind of warmish, even in the winter under there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Anything else?
I'd like to know what was the one thing that you take away with you from your experience with,
What's the one thing I took?
one thing of your
Oh.
experience? How can you
How
describe
could I
your
choose one
experience?
thing?
Well,
Your
what stands out?
Oh, my wife.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I'm glad Carol didn't come with me today.
That's a great thing.
Yeah, I, of course, when I went there the first year, I thought I was unencumbered with, as far as relationships were concerned. And I thought, oh, I wonder if I'll meet somebody, you know. I wonder if there'll be any teachers here that might be interesting to me. I couldn't have married a Zuni for a number of reasons. First of all, I was too old at the time. Zunis almost always have their babies when they're in high school. My first day of school, the class that I loved the most was a 10th grade honors class. And one of the nicest boys in that class was he was just a love, you know. He was charismatic, had a nice smile, he was a sweet person, he was a gentle spirit. And I was saying to the high school librarian, Willard is just a wonderful young man, isn't he? And she said, yeah, and guess what? His wife just had a baby. I thought, what? Oh my God. You know, I feel kind of retarded or something, you know, slow. So there was one young woman who Zuni woman who worked as a librarian in one of the school libraries, and she was the sister of two of my students, and you know, maybe, you know, maybe she's a nice person. That I like her brother, so maybe I'd like her. And I went, but I found out, and just chatting with her, she had 2 kids.
Oh.
And they were like toddlers or older. And I thought, you know, I was hardly ready for a serious relationship, let alone children, all at once. Anyway, the first year was a disaster. There was nobody. The second year, my wife came, and I was part of the, I don't know what they call it, initiation, I don't know, for the county school system. I was there to help people get acclimated with what the reservations were like. And I met her. She was going to be in Zuni. I was in Zuni. My truck was being worked on at the garage, so I said, could I get a ride back with you? And she gave me a ride back. And a couple of weeks later, I asked her out. She said no. So I shouldn't be saying this on film, should I? So I asked out her roommate.
Oh, boy.
Who had been a nun. And I asked her to go to a place where we could dance that was just off the reservation. It was a bar. Bars aren't allowed on the reservation, so Zunis who choose to drink have to leave go off somewhere. And they all go down to Fence Lake, population 35. The only white person who's in the building besides you is the cowboy who's the bartender. He beat me up once, by the way. You have to read the book if you want to know what that's all about. And I went through a jukebox and fell onto the floor, and the jukebox shattered. It was just like in a film. It was wonderful. The only problem was I had a broken blood vessel in my eye, so I had a red eye. And luckily, this was at the end of October. Luckily, it just went away before I went home for Christmas in December. I thought, if my parents see me like this, I'm either going to have to lie to them or suffer their, well, what right did you have, how parents can be. So anyway, I took Eileen to the bar to dance, and that was a mistake. It was a real mistake. I won't tell you why. That was at the time I got beaten up. But then I took her back, and she didn't last long on the reservation. She was just too wild and woolly for the reservation.
Oh.
Wow.
She was an ex-nun with a
Hidden talents.
a what? Oh, a hidden past?
Hidden talents.
Hidden talents. That's my suspicion. So then, I don't know what, maybe it wore my wife down. I don't know. Finally, she accepted, and the first time I took my wife out, we went to Gallup to go shopping, and well, actually, to look in galleries at things that we couldn't afford to have. And I took her out to breakfast and didn't have enough money to pay. That was kind of, but somehow we had a lot in common. I had talents that she admired, and she had talents I admired, and we had a lot of things in common, so, yeah.
Where was she originally from?
She was from St. Louis, and the only person she had in her life was her mother. So when we got married in 1972 in Santa Fe, we decided that we would come back to here, because I'm a 13th generation of my family to live between Plymouth and Portsmouth, Rhode Island. We never got very far, some of us. And I wanted my kids to be 14th generation, and now we have grandchildren who are 15th generation. So, and my wife had no intention of going back to St. Louis, so we came here. And I had always had this dream of having a farm, renovating an old house, restoring an old house. And of course, I learned to weave while I was out in New Mexico, and I learned to do pottery. And I couldn't continue to do pottery when I came back because I didn't know enough about where to where to get clay, or which the paints on the pots were all made with natural ingredients, and I don't think things like that grow here. But I did have access to sheep's wool, so we decided we'd raise sheep and that we would weave. And my wife now is much more a weaver than I am. That's her main job.
I think I've seen your wife at a craft show in Lakeville in the past week and so forth. Did a beautiful, beautiful work.
She does.
As you do.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Richard? Thank you very much.
Okay.
This was wonderful.